Hi, welcome to Sacred Intelligence TV. I'm your host, Dr. Terrell Curry Avery, and I'm joined by my co-host, Susan Bainbridge, and our guest today is Donald Bliss, licensed social worker. And Donald was with us last week, or a couple of weeks ago, and we began talking about self-acceptance, but we also talked about it as it relates to our shared relationship. So we wanted Don to come back again this week and continue the conversation of self-acceptance, because there's so much included in the conversation that we wanted to have a part two of it as Don began to discuss accepting himself as a gay man. We realized that there was more information that we wanted to share with our TV viewing audience. So I would like to have that discussion a little bit more with Don, offer some resources for those of you who are out there who are struggling to come out. If you're in the LGBT community and you have not yet come out, we want to discuss that a little bit more today. And we just want to really talk about not only the process itself, what's available to you, and we also want to be sure to talk about if you are supporting someone who's considering coming out. We want to talk about that a little bit more. But before I get into our discussion today, I do want to make one correction from our last show, and that is I made mention of Otis Moss III. I neglected to say Reverend Otis Moss because he is a pastor, and I wanted to make that clear because one of the things that we talked about is how religion plays a part in whether people accept themselves as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, etc. So having said that, I want to start the day's show. But first of all, I want to welcome both Susan and Don to the show today.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
Thank you, Don, for coming back. And Don, I do want to thank you. I know that you work with us at Sacred Intelligence. You come generally a couple of times throughout the year, and you spend a few months with us, sometimes just a couple of weeks with us. And I know that you do a lot of traveling nationally and internationally. You do a lot of work in California with evolution training, and you might speak to that a little bit more. But I do want to say I appreciate the fact that you are so willing to share your story with us, because it is a private story, and we're just so honored anytime someone comes on the show and they want to tell us a little bit about them, because we do ask probing questions, and so we're thankful that you're willing to share your story with us.
Thank you so much. I'm like I said, it's great to be back, and they are sensitive matters, and it is rather personal, and but especially being here with you two, who are colleagues of mine, there's a level of comfort that I have that enables me to be a little bit more relaxed about sharing that. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the evolution training is a personal spiritual growth weekend intensive based in San Francisco. That is very important to me, and so I did want to at least take a moment to mention that, and that's something that I do in San Francisco. So
can you say a little bit about who it's for and what the aim of it is? Just briefly, I'm not.
Yeah,
I don't think I'll be heading out to San Francisco anytime real soon, but just.
Yeah, well, one of the taglines we have used is that it's a relational training at the speed of love. And it really is about how we, there are things from our past that can get in the way of our living our lives more fully in the present, and it's an opportunity to look at those things and to experience living more authentically and being more authentic with yourself and with others. It's a really powerful training. And
is there a particular audience that it's marketed towards, or a demographic?
Not at all. Everyone. We have people of all ages in there, and I mean, we joke that we've had some babies go through the training because we've had very pregnant women in the training, and there's no particular audience at all. Everyone is welcome, and it's an incredibly powerful experience. So I'm very honored and privileged to be a part of that team and assist with those trainings.
And it seems like it sort of falls in line with what we're talking about with self-acceptance, that you are living more authentically to who you are. And the training is really for any of us who want to accept who we are, no matter what that is, where we are in life. It's so important to be in that frame of mind, because part of our struggle in life is that we don't accept where we are.
Right.
And who we are. And when we don't accept that, we really can't move forward.
Right.
But if you can accept where you are, then you can begin to reflect on who you are, how you show up in the world, and if there's some things you don't like, then you can try to change those things.
Exactly.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, and I don't want you to retell your story of coming out, because if you're in the TV viewing audience and you didn't hear his story a couple of weeks ago in terms of how he accepted who he is as a person, then I want you to go back and take a look at it. You can find it on my YouTube channel, Sacred Intelligence TV. But one of the things that I realized, and we've sort of talked about since that time, is that it sounded like your process of self-acceptance was relatively easy. And I want you to talk a little bit more about that, because it probably wasn't as easy as it came across on our first show. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I was a little concerned about that too, because it's not an easy process. We talked about my having a grounding in the sacred and being able to listen to that still small voice within, as we talked about. And I mentioned the word God, and I also want to say that I'm very comfortable using the word God, but we can use the word sacred, and we can use the word spirit, we can use the word the universe. To me, it is all about that unseen force that moves us and that is within all of us, and that I think is really important to our being in touch with ourselves, and to self-acceptance, to being able to accept ourselves, whomever we are, wherever we are, and all of that. So I just wanted to touch on that. But in a sense, because of the grounding that I had, perhaps from my spiritual background, my religious background, that I was okay, that I was a child again of God, as I will say. There was an ease to it in that sense. However, it's a lifelong process, and I also continue to struggle with self-acceptance even now. I was recalling an incident that I experienced later in life when George Michael came on the scene. I will date myself here, even though I look so young, as you said the last time I was here. I really thought it was, I loved the two earrings. And we used to say, when I was growing up, boys only wore one piercing, for the most part. And we used to say, left is right and right is wrong. Meaning, if you had a piercing in the right ear, you were gay. And if you had a piercing in the left ear, you were right, you were straight. Well, more men started to use piercings in both ears, and I always liked it. I thought it was attractive, but I wouldn't do it because I felt that it was too gay. And I thought it was attractive. I was drawn to it. I wanted to do it. I had no ears pierced, in fact. And there was a time that I was in New York with you and another friend of ours, or another very, very dear friend of mine. And we walked into a shop, and on one side there were sunglasses, and on the other side there was an ear piercing station in this antique dentist chair. It was very cool. And you and our other friend were there looking at the sunglasses, and I just kept being drawn to the ear piercing station. And finally, I think it was our other friends who turned to me and said, "Aren't you going to buy anything? Aren't you interested in these sunglasses?" And I just said, "Well, you know what I'm thinking?" "No, what?" "I'm thinking about getting my ears pierced." And both of you were a little more neutral at the
That's what he says
time.
that both of us did.
You were a little more neutral at the time, actually, but we're also supportive and in saying, well, if that's what you want to do. But our other friend was like, go for it, do it. And that helped me get past that internalized homophobia about how that would look and how I would be perceived by society if I did something that I wanted to do and that I found attractive and that I really did want to do. And I got my ears pierced, and to this day, I have my ears
So
pierced.
how long ago was that?
That was actually in the mid-90s.
You're going to force him to tell
Yeah.
No. I'm wondering,
Yeah.
like, how long into your journey was that?
It was
in terms of
mid-90s, I believe, or late. Well,
it would have been
late.
early 90s.
Oh,
It
could
was early
be.
90s.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where were you in your journey?
Well, I was identifying as gay by that time.
Okay.
But
And had been
again,
for
it
approximately
was,
how long?
10 years, probably.
Okay.
10
So
years.
a decade had gone by and you were still carrying this feeling.
Still. And so I use that. I think that's a really good example, for me anyway, from my personal life, of how I continue to struggle with self-acceptance and with being who I was and expressing that fully in how I presented myself to the world. And even to this day, like I said, I can't think of a specific example right now, but it's a lifelong process.
Well,
Self-acceptance can be a lifelong process, and I think to
Absolutely.
some degree it is a lifelong process.
And it is for lots of us,
Yeah.
right? Because as a black woman, so as a woman and then as a black woman, you're always thinking about, well, if I do that, so say as a woman, if you want to cry, for instance, and you're in this power position, you feel like, well, no, I can't cry because then I'll be seen as weak. Or now that's not the reason that I don't cry. I know there are people out there who's saying, yeah, because she rarely cries, but it's not about that for me. But there are other times that as a black person, you say to yourself, well, if I do X, Y, and Z, they're going to think that I'm doing this because I'm black. And at some point, you have to say to yourself, I can't carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. That's one of the ways that I've gotten past a lot of things that I've had to get through, is to say, they can think whatever they want to. They can think it's because I'm black. They can think it's because I'm a woman. I've got to move on from that. And that's what you have to do, particularly when you're struggling with who you are as a person, just to wrap your brain around that whole thing. And I remember that we had lots of conversations about internalized homophobia, way back in the day.
Yeah, I think crying actually is a very good example for men too, because men in our culture want to cry, but they won't. They won't allow themselves to cry. They won't allow themselves to cry openly and in front of other people, because that makes them weak, that makes them girlish, like how women are supposed to be. Women are allowed to cry in our society for the most part, but men can't cry. There's an internalized misogyny, or I don't really know what we would call
Sexism,
that.
at least.
Yeah, sexism.
Yeah.
So they're unable to, or they feel unable to be fully self-expressed in that way.
One of the things I'm thinking about, and I'm sorry, Susan, to cut you off here, but I'm sort of thinking about how you say that you still struggle with it. Now, I would never be able to tell that you still struggle with it. But one of the things that you mentioned, and I'm not sure if he mentioned this the last time, was that being in San Francisco, I think there's a lot more freedom there. So I wonder if self-acceptance is easier when you're in a place where you can fully embrace who you are without worrying about what other folks are going to say. And that makes it easier when you go back into those other places. So if you come to a place that maybe it's not so accepted or it's not so freeing, are you still able then to just claim who you are, or do you go back into that sort of, okay, let me behave this way because when in Rome, what do you find?
I think it absolutely gives one a strength to, when one sees oneself reflected in a positive way, I mentioned pushing away the noise and not listening to the noise of the media and society around us and all the negative messages. And again, I felt like I almost made it sound too easy. Society and the media are very noisy, and there's a lot of noise that we have to push away in order to get to that grounded place. And once we do, when we find places where we are reflected and places that allow us to be our authentic selves and to even celebrate who we are, it gives us a strength. There's a power in that from which we can draw.
I think that's true, and interestingly, when when I was about to speak, also I was going to get at somewhat the same thing, which was to ask, where were you living at the time that you had your ears pierced?
I was
Were
living
you in
in
New
Washington,
York?
D.C.
In D.C.,
actually,
okay.
yeah.
So-
and I was visiting New York. So I can't say whether or not I would have done it
Well,
in D.C.
you weren't living in
or
San
whether I were-
Francisco,
yeah, I wasn't.
for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I
and-
might also not have done it if I wasn't with friends who
That's what I was going to
supported
say,
me.
is that not only supported, but encouraged you.
Yes.
You had someone else saying to you, go for it, absolutely.
Yeah, do it. Be yourself.
Yeah, what's taking you this long?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That was very powerful.
And I think that's the beauty of our shared relationships. Because if you have those supports, and I think that it's critical that your family accepts you. I know for many people out there, their families will not accept who they are, and so people struggle. But I think it's much easier when you have family members who are supporting you for who you are, and that's why I read the statements from the pastor who said, if my children were gay, I'm going to love them. I'm going to accept them, because that is so critical. And something came across my Facebook earlier this week that I didn't get a chance to read, and it was about evangelical parents who were talking about accepting their kids for who they are. And you should have seen the flurry of comments that came right after. And one person just kind of spoke to the fact that, well, I'm not going to accept it, it's a sin, blah, 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 and we can't justify, their sin, because that's not what the Bible says, blah, blah, blah. And so the person who had posted it said, well, it didn't say anything about accepting whether it was right or wrong. It talked about the process of supporting your children. And often, and I think we talked about this the last time, it's a process even for the people who want to support their kids or their loved ones. It takes some time. If you have a particular way of thinking, it takes some time if you choose to shift that thinking. But also people have to understand that just because I accept who you are as a person does not mean that I have to condone it either. It doesn't mean that I'm saying, okay, go out there and do your thing. I mean, as therapists, we're trying to be supportive of our clients, but that doesn't mean that we accept everything that they do, right? We help them as they're working through it. And I think in that same way, it's important for people to understand that just because you're accepting me, you're loving me, who I am, you don't have to agree with my viewpoints. I mean, there are plenty of things that we don't agree with each other about, but I don't have to think that you're wrong.
Right.
I don't have to denigrate you. I don't have to make you feel less than. And I think that is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a crucial issue when it comes to religion and whether people, and how people study, even if you're looking at the Bible, how people study the Bible to get to those conclusions that they draw. But I don't want to get into a whole theological debate here about that. But it just goes to show that, people can be very narrow-minded. And, when Don and I first became friends, we kind of joked about this on the show the last time, or maybe I asked him afterward. I said, Don, if you were conservative at work, and I know I'm usually conservative at work, how on earth did we ever click with each other? Because we are truly not conservative people. But there was something that we were drawn to. And I remember a conversation when Don told me, as I said, I believe on the last show, he sort of made assumptions about whether I would accept him or not, because he knew what my faith tradition was and all of that. And so I think it goes both ways with the self-acceptance, with being able to say that, let me not write someone off just because they have a certain belief, because that person is capable of growing. Because I remember at the time saying to Don, well, I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I'm not going to stand and judge you. And that was good for him. You know, it was enough. It was enough for us to maintain our friendship, which we were kind of talking about today, that all the beautiful things that's come out of it. And if I had allowed that to stop me, and that's the thing that's critical for our viewing audience, if we make these assumptions about folks, whether it's about their sexuality or their race, whatever the case may be, if we make assumptions and we decide that we're not going to befriend someone because of it, we miss out on so many blessings and so many wonderful opportunities that we can have. So the lesson to you, those of you who would love to support someone in accepting who they are, is about trying to seek to understand who they are, because your life will be richer in the process. I think so.
Yeah, and to me, there's something beyond tolerance that may not quite be acceptance, but yet is a richer ground for relationship, for the sacred relationship. Tolerating has a sense for me of, well, I'm going to deal with it, but I don't like it. I don't necessarily, it's limiting. It's limited and it's limiting, and there's a space between that, and of course acceptance is more embracing. But I think that there's a place where there's a listening. There can be a listening and an openness, a willingness to understand,
Yes.
and again to listen and to really connect with the other. That is again beyond tolerance, but perhaps not acceptance. Acceptance, we don't necessarily have to be accepted by everyone in the world, but if there's no judgment, like you said, if there's no making wrong, if there's no assuming and shaming and all of that other stuff, there's more of an openness.
I
There's more
think
of an opening.
tolerance kind of has a negative connotation to me, and I didn't understand that when you and I used to get into these, sort of discussions, debates, arguments about this idea of tolerance, because we use tolerance all the time, right? We say teach tolerance. When we're talking about diversity, we say teach tolerance, but it really is sort of negative. It's just like, oh, well, I'm going to just tolerate you.
Right.
It's demeaning, really, when you
Yeah.
when you sort of think about it. But to be in this place, as you say, between the tolerance and the acceptance, is that I'm in a place where I'm willing to listen to you, and I'm willing to value who you are as a person. Because if I tolerate you, then I can just as easily dismiss you.
Yeah, and you're not necessarily understanding me at all, or even attempting to understand me, or attempting to meet me where I am. There's a sense of closedness in that, for me. That, and again, it doesn't have to go as far as acceptance. And yes, I embrace who you are. But there's still a greater sense of openness that's beyond tolerance and tolerating that can be available.
So I actually think that's a great segue into talking about like the dangers of coming out in self-acceptance. We sort of mentioned it a little bit the last time, but with this tolerance thing, because I think we see that happening across the country in various other aspects where people tolerate folks, but they don't really want them to be around, and they could dismiss them, they could shoot them, they could kill them, they could do whatever they want to do. And that's, of course, getting on other topics that we hope we'll be able to talk about at some point here. But when people sort of tolerate you, again, you're not valued. And that gets into a dangerous territory. So talk with us a little bit about when it might be dangerous. and that we might not want to, particularly from a therapeutic place, to encourage people to come out. And we've all talked about that a little bit, but can you say a little bit more about it? And I don't know, Susan, if you want to add to that as well based on your experience as a therapist, but when might we say it's not good for you to?
Well, just like there are times when it's not practical, it's not for practical reasons advisable for someone to come out, or for logistical reasons it's not a good idea. There's also emotional dangers, and not everyone, as you mentioned during the last show, not everyone is safe. It's not safe to be authentic with everyone, because there are people who will turn it against you, turn the information against you in some way, whether that's causing you problems in your personal relationships in some way or another, or causing problems for you at work, or simply being abusive to you verbally, being denigrating toward you verbally. And it's difficult to maintain a sense of self-acceptance and self-worth in the face of a lot of negative messages, but unfortunately there are people who are not safe emotionally, spiritually, for us to come out to. And we need to have a sense of that, and a sense of who those people are, I think.
I think that you're right that that's important, and we did discuss that last time, but I think also it's sort of one of the situations where it's sort of like, as a parent maybe, you want to raise your children with the ability to be conscious and aware of their environment and possible threats and dangers, and don't take candy from strangers and all of those things. But at the same time, we don't want them to grow up living in fear of the world.
Right.
And feeling that other human beings can't be trusted because they're dangerous and threatening. So having acknowledged the upsetting but obviously real situation that some people can be in, where there is that danger, what about encouraging this process of coming to, it doesn't necessarily have to be just coming out, but of building that sense of self-acceptance and then feeling comfortable to share that authentic self with others. So, in other words, what are the times that we would say, yeah, I think that this would be really good for you? Because you said there are emotional dangers, but I think also there are many emotional rewards to not having to, or not feeling that you have to hide your authentic self.
And no risk, no reward.
Absolutely.
If you are not willing to risk being authentic with others, you will not get the reward of the joy and the love that is available, the acceptance.
So I need to just sort of express a little bit of we began by talking about the dangers of people, and I get what you all are saying about no risk, no reward, but I want to be very clear, as you were saying before, there are some situations that it would absolutely be dangerous for people to come out and to say who they are. And so we are not encouraging that in any way to say you need to go ahead and risk doing that without getting the appropriate support and help that you need to do that. That's the first thing that we want to say, because it is for some people, and we know just even in the papers recently, there have been transgendered people who've been killed, and some have been killed right in front of the police station. because we know that it is very dangerous for people to come out. So one of the things that we do want to say, particularly because we're all therapists here, is that if you are considering coming out or accepting yourself, no matter what it is that you're doing and who you are and what your process is, you should always have a support, and it is probably advisable if you get into counseling so that you can help someone, so that your therapist can help you strategize about the ways that it might be beneficial for you to do it, and maybe not, and the times that it would not be. I think we want to be clear to say that. But I also want to say that part of the struggle with all of this is learning to love yourself even when you can't be completely authentic with the world is crucial. Because one of the things that we deal with as therapists, I know it's one of the things I was actually dealing with this week, we can't fight the world on all of the battles that are out there. And if we get so caught up in saying, I have to fight this big monster that's out here, if we focus on that rather than focusing on loving ourselves for who we are and healing ourselves, if we could just focus on that rather than the larger picture for the moment, this mind, body, soul, and spirit has to be healed before you can even begin that next step. So I think
I was just going to say, I think it's really important to know where the dangers lie. Are the dangers in your own mind, or are the dangers in the environment real? And there are some people who are dangerous to us, but there are many people who are not dangerous to us, who we create in our minds as dangerous. And there are some truly, unfortunately, sometimes the dangerous people are our own families and our own parents and our own communities and our own society and our own churches and all of these other places where we might look to for love. And that is also where I think it's important to listen to that sacred voice within, so that you can sort through where you're creating the dangers in your own mind and where they really exist. Because often I think people want to experience the freedom of being themselves, of being authentic. And that freedom is at risk with some people, or I'm really not sure that's how I want to say it, but for lack of a better way to say it at this point, I'll use those words. I think we can know if we're listening, really listening to our intuition, to that sacred voice within, where the dangers lie, and know whether or not people, any given person or any given situation is dangerous. There are some people who have been tremendously courageous in coming out in situations that are considered dangerous, and they have been accepted and even embraced and celebrated, and that happens as well. Even in societies that are, or communities or cultures where that is generally not accepted, they have found a way, maybe in being authentic and in claiming that power for themselves, to which the others responded positively.
I think that that's crucial, what you're saying, because I think the better we feel about ourselves and know who we are, when the world crashes down on you, if you have that resolve within you, then it makes you stronger. It makes you say, well, listen, I'm going to just battle you. I don't care what it is that you say. I know who I am as a person. I know who I was created to be. Doesn't mean that it doesn't get tough for you sometimes, because it does. But there's a huge difference between being comfortable with who you are, being secure in who you are, and then being able to tell your family and your friends and the world, versus, I'm a little uncertain, I'm a little scared, I don't feel good about myself already. Because the minute someone says something negative to you, it's going to feed into your psyche. And that's why it's important to get the help that you need when you're going through this process, instead of doing it alone.
Yeah, it's not as simple as saying, you should accept me, you should be able to. you should because you're my mother, you're my father, you're my family, you're whatever. And really knowing that that's available in that relationship. We have to meet people where they are, and sometimes where they are is not a very pretty place.
You know, we're talking a lot here about getting the supports that you need for self-acceptance, particularly as it relates to being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, and even questioning. So we want to tell you that even if you can't go to a therapist, which we recommend just in terms of helping you to problem solve, that's all. But even if you can't do that, there are plenty of places out here that offer support. And particularly, I think for our young people, PFLAG, which is a support group, and it's a national support group for teenagers, and it's parents and friends and family of gay and lesbian and transgendered and questioning youth. And many of these organizations, many of their locations for where they have their meetings are in churches. So it's a great avenue for young people to come out and to feel supported. So you can go to pflag.org and learn more information about them. There are numerous churches that are accepting of individuals who are LGBTQT, and I think that we can talk a little bit about some of the ones that are more accepting, but there are lots of places to get the resources that you need. You don't ever have to feel like you're alone in this process. I think years ago, there weren't as many resources out here, but even in Connecticut, I know that, I've worked with people who will say, well, Connecticut is very closeted, and that may be the case, but there are also lots of resources for people here as well. But I wanted to talk a little bit before we kind of jump into a few of the perhaps religious organizations that might be more accepting, is to talk about this idea, and I don't know if you can speak to this, Don, but to talk about this idea of still accepting your faith and your religion, even if other people are telling you it's wrong. When I first began divinity school, I took a course on gay theology, and this book that I was reading was talking about all the different denominations, Christian denominations, and the people who were speaking were lesbian or gay. Predominantly, they didn't talk a lot about transgendered at that particular time. And one of the things that they would say is, I can't give up being Catholic any more than I can give up being gay. Because I would think, well, why not just leave, Catholicism, or why not leave Presbyterianism, whatever it is, Baptists. I'm not just picking on the Catholics, but why not leave? And so that hit me when that particular person said, I can't give up that any more than I can being gay. And why should a person have to choose? Because we all come out and we're divinely created. And what we're really saying to that person is, you've got to choose between accepting who God created you to be and being a part of this faith tradition that celebrates and worships God. We're asking people to choose. So I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit in terms of your understanding and what you eventually did with your own spiritual growth through that process.
I don't know that I can actually, because I don't know that I have the capacity to do what those people did or do. And what I find really admirable about that is that they are able to meet those organizations where they are in a way and on a level that I don't know that I can do. But again, I have a tremendous amount of respect for people who are able to do that. And there's a certain level, talk about accepting, and I mean the level of patience that people have with these organizations that they want to be a part of to me is, it's sort of beyond my understanding.
You mean you're not that open? Is that what you're saying?
Well, perhaps that is what
because
I'm
we've been
open,
talking
but-
about being open and trying
Yeah.
to understand.
Yeah, but it's all about choices, as you said, and I think as long as people are really clear about their choices and that it is a choice, because no one is born Catholic. You know, there are people born gay, but no one is born Catholic. No one is not born in any religion. It may be very deeply ingrained in and deeply enculturated in them, but no one is born.
But I think here's what's crucial though. If you grow up in a particular tradition, and I know, and I'm blanking on the name now, but there's an African American gospel artist who came out, and he said, "You're not going to run me out of the church,"
Right.
basically. And what he's saying is that I love singing gospel music, I love God, I love praising God, and I'm going to do that no matter what you say. And I think that that's the realness of it, because I think that's where you decide that the sacred is more important to me than this denomination, than this affiliation. And I am going to embrace that, because you see, we're all more than just oneself, right? We're all more than just being gay or straight or bisexual or any of that. So what he's saying is, I am just as much a person who is gifted with the ability to sing, the ability to make others feel great, the ability to help others heal when they're feeling down and out, and I want to worship and praise, and I think that that's what's crucial.
I think that's so powerful. I think that is just really incredibly powerful, that person was not willing to give up the traditions and the rituals and the richness of his religious tradition, nor give up his sexuality. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people in those situations are in the closet.
Oh,
and
of course.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, if you go into the church, well, I don't want to
Yeah.
call out. But
Right.
Dawn, I just want to say something that I think is really crucial, and particularly for me as a minister and as a woman of God, and I know I'll have those people out there who are saying, how could she be a woman of God, and she's on talking about this, but here's what I think is important. It's not just the tradition. I want to be very clear about that. I think it is a part of it. It's not just that, though. It's about my relationship with God. And you're not going to interfere with that.
Right.
I am a sacred being.
Right.
And you're trying to interfere with that by telling me, you know, who I can be and what I can do. No, this is how I choose to worship. This is how I choose to praise God. And you're not going to stop me.
Right.
And I think that if I feel like, if it seems like I'm a little passionate about it, I am very much so
Right.
passionate about it, because as we've been saying since the show began, we are created as divine beings. That's first and foremost. And so we don't ever have to separate from that. And if there's something going on within us, because it's not to say that there aren't things about us that we need to change, because there are things, but that's where that relationship with the sacred comes in. And it's when you have that that genuine relationship and you're steeped in it and you're solid in it, the sacred is going to guide you anyway. And I believe that the sacred is guiding those people to say, this is what I want to stay in.
Yeah.
You know?
And unfortunately, many of those, religious leaders in those traditions preach stuff that is not in the Bible, and preach stuff that Jesus never said, if in the case of their being Christian. And so for someone to claim that, I think is really incredibly powerful. And to be I don't even know what the word is I'm looking for, but to be firm in that,
And I think here's the thing, though, I do want to acknowledge that even while that person is being firm in it, and I want to say this to our viewers, it still doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt when you have a pastor or a priest or rabbi, whoever it is, that gets up every Sunday, or even if it's once a year, and tells you that you are doing something wrong, that you are a sinner, and that God doesn't really love you because of that, because that hurts. It is
Yeah.
really telling that person you are not valued. And I think we have to be careful with those messages that we're sending out. Now, I know that I'm going to get a lot of flack about that, but I'm okay with getting that flack about that,
Yeah.
because, you know, we are created from a place of love, and God has created all of us. And so to get up in church and to tell people, because the pastors also know who the people are in church that are gay often.
And sometimes they are
Exactly,
themselves
and sometimes the
preaching
pastors are
negative
too. And we've
messages.
seen that come out, or, you know.
The priests, the pastors, whatever the case may be.
Exactly, because people can't live authentically
Yeah.
who they are.
And
So-
that's not coming from a place of love. That's coming from the place of fear that we were talking
Mm-hmm.
about for themselves.
Self-hate as well.
Exactly.
Right? Because
Exactly.
just like
Internalized
you talk,
homophobia,
exactly,
as
exactly.
we were talking
But there
about.
are some,
Which is insidious.
Right.
And, you know, like I was saying, even throughout my life, even though I had a grounding, a foundation of self-acceptance, there were still a lot of little voices inside my head going, oh, but you can't do that because that's too gay and people are going to think this or think that. And I mean, it even breaking it down, it even can go into what we do in the bedroom, because if I do this, as even though I've recognized that I'm gay, whoever I am, if I do this in the bedroom, that means that I'm too gay,
yeah.
or too effeminate, or too whatever. You know, and there are gay people who have these boxes around what they're willing to
what you
do
can and-
when they're being intimate with someone of the same gender, because no, that would mean.
Yeah. So, because we certainly don't want to delve too far into that, but I do.
Of course not, but,
Right.
you know.
But here's what I do want to just say, because I want to give our viewers some indication of some places where they can go to worship, if they would like to go and worship and still proclaim this relationship with the sacred. There are some churches like the metropolitan churches that
Metropolitan
community
churches, yeah.
churches, in fact, and they are nationwide, I believe.
International.
International even.
Yes,
So they
international.
are really great churches to go to, because the other thing about it is when you read it, now I know this will just really blow people's minds, but I love the way some of the pastors, and I've read some of their sermons, talk about, and I think it's
No,
all
that's a
sort of
Christian
guessing.
church.
It's a
No,
Christian
that's
church.
for
It's a
people who
Christian
are
church.
Christian, yeah,
But I've
and
read
it's-
some of the sermons, and one sermon in particular, they talked about Jesus healing a gay man, and I thought it was a fascinating article, because they went back and they looked at the Greek and they looked at the words that the centurion was using for, can you come and heal my slave? And so they did all the work on it. So you can do the homework and you can look it up yourself, because I know you're out there saying, no, that can't be true. But I love the way that they are just embracing the scriptures in
Yes,
that way.
yes.
But there are also other faith traditions, and I wondered, Susan, in terms of Quaker.
I've been trying to not interrupt, but yeah.
Well, it's kind of hard. Right, because we get into these
We get into our
things all the
dialogues,
time.
and it's
So-
hard, I know it's hard to jump in, but.
So,
you know.
so that was one of the things that I was thinking, both when you were talking about that you shouldn't have to leave your faith tradition, and that there's this sense of, I'm going to worship, I'm going to praise, you can't stop that. And I think that while I understand that it's much more difficult to change a system if you're outside the system. And
Yeah,
and so
good point.
and that is one reason I think that many people do choose to
Yeah.
stay within their tradition,
Good point.
because that is the only way they feel
That
they
change will
can be
bring-
one
will
of
come
the
about.
right, that they will be one of the instruments of change within that organization or that tradition. But then those who maybe don't feel up to taking that on, I mean, you were talking a little bit about that big battle. There are other traditions that, such as Quakerism, that fully embrace all all walks of life, all lifestyles.
Most Buddhism, most
There's-
lineages of Buddhism as
Yes,
well.
there are Buddhist Quakers, there are Jewish Quakers, there are Catholic Quakers, which is a little more complicated. They often call themselves recovering Catholics. Again, we won't bash on Catholics because that's not, but from all different faith traditions, and that come to Quakerism partly because no one is, and I'm sorry, I know, Teralyn, that you are one of these people that might be looked to as almost an intermediary between the sacred and
Actually, that's
the
not our
flock.
tradition.
Right, but I'm saying like that in what I'm about to say, that
Okay.
that you might fall into that category, whereas Quakers don't have, in general, ministers. We do have some who seem to have a gift for ministering to people, and so there are certainly some programmed meetings that do have someone who will lead the meeting in a certain kind of worship and do something that's somewhat like a sermon, but for the most part, that's one of the key pieces of Quakerism, is this sense that everyone has their own individual relationship with the divine, and that revelation did not stop once the Bible was written, and that this is an ongoing process, and that there's no reason that we can't be as close to the divine and the sacred as anyone, throughout history has been. And Quakers have been partly because there's such a strong belief in that of God in everyone. That's a belief that accounts somewhat for our peace testimony, that doing violence to another person is in effect doing violence to the sacred.
Right.
But it also has led to this testimony of equality, that if we all have that of the sacred within us, we are all quite literally created equal in that sense. And so Quakers have been on the forefront of all sorts of civil rights movements, from the Underground Railroad. Many of the households along the Underground Railroad were Quaker households.
And I think it's really interesting, though, because I think with particular faith traditions, people are more comfortable being advocates for certain things and not for others, right? So for some people, it's much more comfortable to talk about, I'm going to be an advocate for the poor, or I'm going to be an advocate for black people, but I'm not going to be an advocate for someone who's gay, because being black isn't a sin, but being gay is. Do you see but really, if we come from that perspective of love, and for those people who have the tradition of Jesus being God, there's nowhere that you would ever look and find an example of where Jesus was being mean, evil, and nasty to folks for being who they were.
Quite the
There's
opposite.
no,
Quite
and it's
the opposite.
all about love. But, I wanted to just say this too. There are congregational churches, and there are many in Connecticut. For those of you who are in the local area, there are many congregational churches who are also very supportive,
Very affirming.
as well.
Yep.
And if you go to outct.org, OUTCT.org, you will find a list of places of worship. You will find also just resources there as well. I also want to point out, particularly for our young people, if you're not familiar with True Colors. True Colors is an organization that's it's important for parents and educators alike, and social workers as well. That particular organization is about young people and educating and being an advocate for young people and supporting them in their coming out process. But it's a really important organization for young folks. They have a conference every year. I don't know the date of their 2015 conference, but it is coming up. They work with social service agencies, they work with schools and other organizations within your community. So particularly if you are a service provider and you're looking for ways to help your kids in terms of coming out, you can go to their website as well, which is called truecolors.org. That's a place for you to get some information from as well. And so there are numerous organizations that are out here. You wanted to say something, Don?
Indeed. Yeah, well, I just wanted to be clear that I did not leave the Catholic Church because of its stance on homosexuality or my unwillingness or inability to take a stand within that tradition. I left for completely unrelated reasons and identify as a Unitarian Universalist now, which is a Congregationalist church and which is very affirming of gay people, gay and lesbian, transgender, questioning people. So I just wanted to make that clear.
So, as usual, we're coming to the end of our show, and the time goes by really quickly. But the last time we gave you some golden rules for self-acceptance, we will be offering those same golden rules this time. So please go to our website at sacredintelligence.org, and you will find the golden rules posted there. There's a link there. But Donald, how can people get in touch with you and find out a little bit more about you if they have questions about self-acceptance in general, but even if they wanted to work with you, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, they can get in touch with me through Sacred Intelligence, www.sacredintelligence.com, but I also have my own website, and I do online counseling, so I'm available to people all over the country, and that site is www.donaldcbliss, C as in Christopher.com.
So thank you, because you just corrected me for what I said, my website. I think I said sacredintelligence.org. Did I say that?
Oh, I'm not sure.
Did I? Okay,
Yeah.
I was just thinking, well, he just corrected that. But we do thank you for tuning into our show today. If you'd like to get in touch with any of us and learn more information about self-acceptance or just want to work with us in general, please do visit our website. But we also invite you to go to Sacred Intelligence TV on YouTube, and we ask that you will please subscribe to the channel and then tell your friends about it. And please, please, please do write in and give us your feedback and your comments on today's show and any of the shows. We'd love to hear from you. And we might in the future even start taking a couple of questions that you might have and would like addressed on the show. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.